The cold metal table felt freezing against the baby's skin as Dr. Devin Williams finished running his final tests. The laboratory hummed with alien technology that most humans had never seen. Devin had been working for the Valerian Empire for 3 years now, ever since they had conquered Earth's outer colonies. He told himself he was helping his people by cooperating, but deep down he knew better. The baby boy on the table couldn't be more than 10 months old. Subject 15 Charlie, the files called him. Devin had watched dozens of human infants go through these enhancement procedures over the past months. Most didn't survive the neural implants. The few that did usually showed incredible strength or speed afterward. But this one was different. This one was completely normal. Another failure, muttered Dr. Kira Blackwood from across the room. She was the only other human scientist the Valerians kept around. Her job was to monitor the subjects during the painful procedures. The genetic modifications didn't take it all. Brain scans show zero enhancement. He's just an ordinary human baby. Devin picked up the child, who looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. The baby didn't cry or fuss. He just stared with the kind of innocent trust that made Devin's stomach twist with guilt. How had he become someone who experimented on children? When had he stopped seeing them as people and started thinking of them as test subjects? Protocol is clear, came the mechanical voice of Commander Zeth through the intercom. The Valerian officer never showed his face to the human workers. Failed subjects must be disposed of immediately. We cannot waste resources on defective specimens. Kira was already preparing the biopod. It was a small capsule designed to keep a person alive just long enough to reach the disposal planet below. The official reports would say the subject died during experimentation. Plain. Simple. No questions asked. Devin strapped the baby into the pod's tiny life support system. The child gurgled happily, reaching for Devin's finger with small, perfect hands. For a moment, Devin hesitated. This wasn't right. This wasn't what he had signed up for when he agreed to work with the aliens. He had thought he was helping to make humanity stronger, not throwing babies away like broken toys. The coordinates are already programmed, Kira said, her voice flat and emotionless. Draker Prime. It's a volcanic wasteland where they dump all the failed experiments. The beacon will attract scavengers. It'll be over quick. Devin sealed the pod and loaded it into the ejection chamber. Through the small window, he could see the baby looking around with wonder, as if this was all some exciting adventure. The innocence in those eyes would haunt Devin for the rest of his life. Ejecting now, Devin announced, his finger hovering over the launch button. He pressed it before he could change his mind. The pod shot away from the ship like a bullet, disappearing into the swirling red clouds of the planet below. Devin watched until it vanished completely, then turned away. Another day, another disposal. That's all this was supposed to be. But as the pod fell through Draker Prime's thick atmosphere, something extraordinary was happening. The crash landing sent up a cloud of ash and debris that could be seen for miles. The impact beacon started screaming across every frequency, a desperate cry for help that echoed through the mountain ranges. In a crystal cave carved into the highest peak, something ancient stirred. Golden eyes opened for the first time in over 1,000 years. Massive wings stretched, shaking dust from scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. The sound that had awakened him was familiar yet different. It was the cry of something small and helpless, but there was something else. Something that spoke to instincts older than civilization itself. Elder Theron emerged from his cave with movements that shook the very mountain. He was enormous, even by dragon standards. His kind had once protected the galaxy from those who would harm the innocent. But they had grown tired of wars and politics, tired of watching species destroy themselves despite all help offered. So they had withdrawn to this forgotten world to meditate and remember better times. The dragon found the crashed pod in a valley of volcanic glass. Steam rose from the impact crater, but the biopod had held together. Inside, the human infant was very much alive, looking up at the massive creature with the same trusting eyes he had shown Devin. Theron's ancient heart, which had grown cold over centuries of isolation, suddenly felt warm again. Here was innocence thrown away by those who should have protected it. Here was trust offered freely, even to something that could end a life with a single breath. The dragon carefully lifted the pod in claws that could crush starships, yet moved with the gentleness of a parent with their newborn child. 20 years felt like a single heartbeat to the ancient dragons of Draker Prime, but for the human child they had rescued, it was an entire lifetime of learning and growing. The baby they had named Kai had become a young man who moved through their crystal caves with the confidence of someone truly at home. Kai's morning routine started before the twin suns rose over the volcanic peaks. He would climb to the highest ledge of Elder Theron's cave and practice the breathing exercises the dragons had taught him. While he could never breathe fire like his adoptive family, he had learned to channel the planet's thermal energy in ways that amazed even the eldest dragons. "Focus on the heat beneath your feet," Elder Luna called from her perch nearby. Her scales shimmered silver in the early light as she watched Kai work with the crystal formations. "Feel how it wants to move upward. Guide it, don't force it." Kai placed his palms against the warm volcanic stone and concentrated. Slowly, the crystals around him began to glow with inner fire. Not the destructive flames that dragons commanded, but a gentle warmth that could heal wounds or power the ancient technologies hidden throughout their mountain home. It had taken him 15 years to master this technique, but now it felt as natural as breathing. The dragons had been patient teachers in ways that would have been impossible for any other species. When Kai struggled with understanding quantum mathematics at age 12, Elder Theron simply waited 3 years and tried again with a different approach. When teenage anger made him lash out at the restrictions of living on a hidden world, Elder Zara had shared stories of galactic civilizations for months until his curiosity overcame his frustration. Each dragon had taught him different skills. Elder Phoenix, whose red scales caught light like rubies, had shown him how to read stellar navigation charts that covered distances most species couldn't even imagine. Elder Storm had taught him to understand the subtle vibrations that traveled through space itself, allowing communication across impossible distances without any technology that other species could detect or intercept. But the most important lessons came during the evening gatherings when all the dragons would share the history they had witnessed. Kai would sit in the center of their circle, feeling tiny among beings whose heads were larger than his entire body, as they spoke of worlds they had protected and civilizations they had guided. "We were guardians once," Elder Theron would begin, his voice carrying the weight of geological ages. "We helped younger species learn to reach for the stars without losing their souls in the process. We stopped wars before they could consume entire systems. We protected those who could not protect themselves. But power corrupts," Elder Luna would continue, her silver eyes reflecting sadness that ran deeper than oceans. "Even among those we helped, species we had lifted from primitive barbarism became conquerors themselves. Children we had saved grew up to become tyrants. We grew tired of the endless cycle of violence and greed. So we withdrew," Elder Phoenix added, flames dancing around her words. "We thought perhaps the galaxy would learn wisdom on its own if we stopped interfering. We thought our time as protectors was over." Elder Zara, whose blue scales held the wisdom of deep waters, would always finish these stories the same way. But isolation brought its own problems. While we meditated on ancient philosophy, species like the Valerians grew bold. They began treating thinking beings like laboratory animals. They started conducting experiments that would have horrified the most savage warlords of earlier ages. Kai had grown up knowing exactly where he came from and why. The dragons had never hidden the truth about the experiments that brought him to their world. They had shown him recordings from Valerian facilities, testimonies from other survivors, and the cold calculation behind programs designed to turn children into weapons. Instead of making him bitter, this knowledge had forged something else in Kai's heart. He understood that his rescue hadn't been chance but choice. The dragons had stirred from their long isolation because something about his situation had reminded them why they had become protectors in the first place. "The Valerians threw me away because I wasn't the weapon they wanted to create," Kai said during one evening gathering when he was 19. "But you found me. You taught me that real strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you choose to protect." The dragons looked at each other with expressions that spoke of decisions being made without words. Elder Theron lowered his massive head until his golden eyes were level with Kai's human ones. "The galaxy has grown more dangerous during our absence, young one. Perhaps it is time we return to the stars. Not as conquerors or judges, but as the protectors we once were. And perhaps," Elder Luna added with something that might have been a smile on her serpentine features, "it is time for the herald of our return to be someone who understands both the cruelty we seek to stop and the hope we fight to preserve." The distress signal came through the quantum channels like a scream in the darkness. Kai was practicing his thermal manipulation when Elder Theron's voice boomed through the crystal caves, carrying urgency that the young man had never heard before. "Human vessel in distress. Valerian research ship has taken prisoners. 300 souls crying for help." Kai dropped the glowing crystal he had been working with and ran toward the main chamber. The dragons were already gathering, their massive forms creating shadows that danced across the cave walls. Elder Luna's scales rippled with silver light as she processed the incoming data. "It's a colony transport," she reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. Families trying to reach the outer settlements. The Valerians intercepted them 6 hours ago. They're already beginning the selection process. Kai's blood ran cold. He knew what selection process meant. Children separated from parents. Adults sorted by physical condition and genetic markers. The weak disposed of immediately, the strong sent to experimentation facilities. He had seen the recordings, heard the testimonies. Now it was happening again, and 300 innocent people were living his own nightmare. "We have to do something," Kai said, though he knew the dragons had already made their decision. 20 years of training had led to this moment. Elder Phoenix stepped forward, her red scales glowing like heated metal. "The time for hiding is over. But we cannot simply appear as dragons. The galaxy believes we are extinct, and we must use that advantage carefully." Elder Theron nodded slowly. "Kai will go first. Alone. As our herald." The preparation took only hours, but each minute felt like an eternity knowing what the prisoners were enduring. The dragons worked together to create something the galaxy had never seen before. Armor that could survive in the vacuum of space, woven from crystallized dragon fire and quantum-aligned metals. Weapons that channeled stellar energy through focus gems older than most civilizations. But the most important gift they gave him was authority. A quantum communicator that would let every word he spoke carry the harmonic resonance of dragon speech. When he commanded, his voice would make starship hulls ring like bells. When he threatened, the very air would vibrate with power that reached back to the beginning of time. "Remember," Elder Zara said as she sealed the final connection on his armor, "you are not just representing yourself. You carry the authority of all dragon clans. Speak with our voice. Act with our will." The journey to intercept the Valerian ship took 3 hours through quantum-fold space. Kai had never traveled this way before, his consciousness riding waves of energy that connected distant stars. When he materialized in the transport ship's cargo hold, the change in environment hit him like a physical blow. The smell reached him first. Fear, sweat, and the antiseptic scent of medical preparation. The cargo hold had been converted into holding pens, with families pressed together behind energy barriers. Children cried while adults tried to comfort them with words that carried no real hope. Kai moved through the corridors like flowing shadow, his armor adapting to make him nearly invisible to the ship's sensors. The first Valerian guard he encountered was checking prisoner manifests on a portable screen. The alien never saw him coming. "Sleep," Kai whispered, touching the guard's neck with fingers that carried precisely calibrated neural dampeners. The Valerian collapsed without a sound, and Kai was already moving toward the next checkpoint. Dr. Nova Chen was in the medical bay, preparing syringes filled with neural mapping compounds. She looked up as her equipment started malfunctioning, screens flickering and machines powering down one by one. Then she saw him standing in the doorway and her hands began to shake. "Impossible," she breathed. "Subject 15 Charlie was disposed of 20 years ago. You should be dead." "The dragons found me," Kai said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the metal walls sing with resonant frequencies. "They taught me that every life has value. They showed me what real strength means. Today you learned that lesson." Nova reached for an alarm button, but her equipment was already completely dead. The lights dimmed as Kai stepped into the room, thermal energy flowing around him in visible waves. His armor glowed with inner fire that spoke of power beyond anything the Valerians had ever encountered. "Call your captain," Kai commanded. "Tell him the dragons have returned. Tell him that those who prey on the innocent now face judgment. Tell him he has 10 minutes to release every prisoner and surrender his ship." Nova's communicator crackled to life, though she hadn't touched it. Kai's quantum interface was overriding their entire system, broadcasting his words to every corner of the vessel. "This is impossible," the captain's voice came back, full of disbelief and growing fear. "Dragons are extinct. This is some kind of human trick." "Test me," Kai replied simply. The ship's weapon systems powered up, targeting the medical bay where he stood. Kai raised his hand, and every energy conduit in the ship began glowing white-hot. The weapons died before they could fire a single shot. The rescue of the colony transport sent shockwaves across the galaxy faster than any news network could carry the story. Within days, every major species had heard whispers of the impossible. Dragons had returned, and they had chosen a human as their voice. Ambassador Riley Foster was addressing the Galactic Federation Council when the first reports reached the chamber. She had been trying to negotiate better protection for human settlements when her aide handed her a data pad with trembling fingers. The footage was grainy, taken by a survivor's personal recorder, but it was unmistakable. A human figure moving through a Valerian ship like living fire, speaking with harmonics that made metal sing. "Impossible," growled Chancellor Vex from the Alterian delegation. His crystalline form sparkled with disbelief. "Dragons are legends. Fairy tales told to children. This is some human propaganda stunt." But Ambassador Foster had studied the old records. Every species had dragon stories, myths passed down through generations. Protectors who came when civilizations were threatened. Guardians who vanished when their help was no longer welcome. The similarities were too precise to be coincidence. "What if they're not legends?" she asked quietly. "What if they were real and they've been hiding?" The question hung in the chamber like smoke. Species that had built their entire power structures on the assumption that dragons were extinct suddenly faced a terrifying possibility. If the ancient guardians had returned, everything would change. The Valerian ambassador, General Knox Valdez, slammed his fist on the speaking podium. His scarred face twisted with rage as he addressed the council. "Even if dragons exist, which they don't, one ship doesn't prove anything. The Valerian Empire has dealt with threats before. We will not be intimidated by ghost stories and parlor tricks." His confidence lasted exactly 6 more days. The attacks began small and surgical. A research facility on Kepler 7 found its power cores mysteriously overloaded during the night shift. No one was hurt, but every piece of experimental data was destroyed. The facility's director, Dr. Chin Rodriguez, described watching his security cameras melt from the inside while something moved through his corridors like controlled lightning. 2 days later, a slave ship heading for the Rigel markets discovered its navigation system had been reprogrammed. Instead of reaching their buyers, they found themselves docking at a Liberation Fleet base. The ship's captain swore his instruments had been singing in harmonics he'd never heard before. Then came the message that changed everything. Every communication array in the galaxy received it simultaneously. Not through normal channels, but as vibrations that passed through quantum fields themselves. The words appeared in every species' native language, but underneath them was something deeper. A resonance that spoke to the most primitive parts of every thinking mind. "The dragons have returned. We have watched from afar as cruelty spreads like poison among the stars. No more. Those who prey upon the defenseless will face judgment. Those who protect the innocent will find allies. Choose wisely." The message was brief, but its effects were immediate and catastrophic for those who had grown comfortable with exploiting the weak. The Sindonian flesh markets found their facilities mysteriously abandoned overnight. Their merchandise vanished without trace. The Kalos mining operations discovered their slave workers had simply walked through locked doors that opened at their approach. Captain Jazz Washington was commanding a human defense patrol when she witnessed something that would define the rest of her career. Her sensors detected a massive energy signature approaching a known pirate base. She expected to see a battleship or carrier. Instead, she watched a creature the size of a small moon glide through space without any visible propulsion. "Dragon confirmed," she whispered into her recorder, her voice full of awe and terror. "Actual dragon. Moving through vacuum like it's flying through atmosphere. It's beautiful and terrifying and impossible, and I'm watching it happen." The pirate base, which had been a thorn in civilian shipping for years, went dark in minutes. When patrol ships investigated later, they found the facility intact but empty. Every weapon had been fused into abstract metal sculptures. Every computer core had been carefully removed and destroyed. The pirates themselves were found unconscious in their quarters, unharmed but somehow changed. Many would later describe having dreams of vast golden eyes that judged their actions and found them lacking. But perhaps the most shocking development came from an unexpected source. Elder Council member Tara Blackstone had spent 40 years building the reputation of human diplomacy in galactic politics. She was known for her careful words and measured responses. So when she stood before the Federation and spoke with absolute certainty, every species listened. "I have seen the recordings. I have analyzed the quantum resonance patterns. I have spoken with survivors of these interventions. The dragons are real, they are active, and they have chosen humanity as their representatives in galactic affairs. This is not a request or a negotiation. This is a statement of fact that every species must now factor into their future plans." The chamber erupted in chaos, but Tara continued speaking with a calm that cut through the noise. "The age of exploitation is ending. Those who have built their power on the suffering of others now face something older and more powerful than any government or empire. Adapt to this new reality, or be swept aside by it." The Valerian war fleet assembled at the edge of their home system like a storm gathering strength. Admiral Kane Winters stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as 300 warships took formation around him. Each vessel bristled with weapons designed to crack planets and burn entire solar systems. The admiral had spent his entire career building this fleet, turning it into the most feared military force in known space. "Dragons or not," he growled to his assembled captains over the communication array, "we have firepower that can level mountains. Nothing survives concentrated plasma bombardment from 300 ships. Nothing." The plan was simple and brutal, exactly what the Valerian Empire did best. Jump directly to Draker Prime with overwhelming force. Burn the planet's surface until nothing could survive. If dragons were real, they would die like any other creature when faced with enough raw destruction. What Admiral Winters didn't understand was that dragons had been watching his preparations for weeks. Every communication, every strategic meeting, every weapon calibration had been monitored by beings whose understanding of technology went back to when his species was still learning to make fire. Elder Theron emerged from his crystal cave as the enemy fleet entered the system. Behind him came the other dragons, their forms blotting out the sun as they took to the void of space. But these weren't the creatures of myth that most species imagined. These were beings who had transcended the need for technology by becoming one with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Kai stood on Elder Theron's broad back, his dragon-forged armor gleaming in the light of distant stars. 20 years of preparation had led to this moment. Below them, the Valerian fleet spread out in attack formation, their weapons charging with enough energy to sterilize worlds. "Remember," Elder Luna's voice reached him through quantum harmonics, "we are not here to destroy. We are here to judge." The battle lasted 47 minutes, but calling it a battle was generous. What happened was more like watching natural forces reshape reality according to their will. Dragons moved through space like living comets, their passage bending light itself around their forms. When the Valerians fired their planet-killer weapons, the energy simply dispersed around the dragons like water flowing around stones. Admiral Winters watched his carefully planned assault fall apart in ways his tactical computers couldn't process. His ship's weapons were overheating without hitting anything. His navigation systems were being rewritten by some outside force. His communication arrays were singing with harmonics that made his bridge crew dizzy and confused. "Impossible," he whispered, watching a dragon the size of a battle cruiser glide past his flagship's viewports. "These things don't follow any known laws of physics." That's when Kai appeared on his bridge. One moment the space was empty, the next a figure materialized out of what looked like controlled starfire. The human moved with fluid grace toward the Admiral's command chair while Valerian guards reached for weapons that suddenly felt too heavy to lift. "Admiral Kane Winters," Kai said, his voice carrying resonances that made the ship's hull ring like a bell. "You stand accused of crimes against every civilized species in the galaxy. You have turned children into weapons. You have treated thinking beings like laboratory animals. You have spread suffering wherever your ships have traveled." Admiral Winters tried to activate his personal shields, but his equipment was dead. Every system on his bridge had gone dark except for the display showing him exactly what was happening to his fleet. Ship after ship was being systematically disabled, their crews left unconscious but alive, their weapons transformed into twisted metal sculptures. "This is war," Winters snarled, finding his voice despite the fear crawling up his spine. "In war there are casualties. The weak serve the strong. That's how the universe works." "That's how your empire works," Kai corrected, stepping closer. "But your empire ends today." Through the bridge viewports, Winters could see dragons surrounding every ship in his fleet. Not destroying them but somehow reaching inside their hulls and making precise changes. Weapons systems were being carefully dismantled. Navigation computers were being reprogrammed. Most importantly, every piece of experimental data from decades of illegal research was being systematically erased. "You're going to kill us all," Winters said, but there was a question in his voice. "No," Kai replied. "Death would be mercy for what you've done. Instead you're going to live. You're going to remember every victim whose screams you ignored. You're going to spend the rest of your life making amends for the suffering you've caused." Kai touched the Admiral's forehead with one armored finger. For a moment, Winters saw through the eyes of every being his empire had experimented on. He felt their pain, their terror, their desperate hope for rescue that never came. The weight of 10,000 victims crashed into his consciousness all at once. When it was over, Admiral Winters collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face for the first time since childhood. The aftermath reshaped galactic civilization in ways that historians would study for centuries. The Valerian research facilities were converted into rehabilitation centers. Their military assets became humanitarian fleets. Most importantly, the Galactic Federation restructured itself with dragon oversight, ensuring protection for all thinking beings regardless of their technological development. Kai returned to human space as humanity's first dragon herald, but he didn't stay long in any one place. There were too many species that needed protection, too many wrongs that required correction, too many lost children who needed someone to remind them that they had value. And in the crystal archives of Draker Prime, Elder Theron began recording new histories. Stories of civilizations learning to choose cooperation over conquest, of species reaching beyond their limitations to help others reach theirs, and of a human child who had reminded the galaxy's oldest guardians why they had chosen to be protectors in the first place. The age of exploitation was over. The age of protection had begun.